You are listening to the podcast To Be Single or Not to Be by Shanna Montana, a podcast where we talk about the single life, dating, and relationships so you can make a decision at the end of each episode and decide to be single or not to be. That is the final question.
Welcome back to the To Be Single or Not to Be podcast. And today we are going to talk about something that hits all of us: surrender versus control. And more specifically, trusting God's plan for your life when your human instinct is to try to direct and control everything. So often we measure our worth by how we can make things happen, the projects that we can control, the outcomes that we can engineer, and even the people that we can manage. And in doing that, we can also lose the grace and ease that comes with truly surrendering. Trust me, I know it. But the issue here is not ambition or responsibility. It's the part of us that believes we are the ultimate architect in our own life, that we're going to make things happen when we say they are going to happen, how we say they are going to happen, and with who they are going to happen with. But then we find ourselves wrestling with the thoughts that we don't even control ourselves. Like, we have these thoughts that we can't control, but we want to control everything else. And thoughts that come up that are like, what if I fail? What if I miss my window? What if I'm too old? What if it's too late? What if this doesn't happen fast enough? Why isn't this thing happening for me right now? These are the thoughts that we consistently have. Sometimes that becomes a constant fight against reality instead of learning how to move with the flow that He is already handling your life. So, this episode is about understanding why we cling to control, how it shows up in your day to day, and how to begin letting go in a way that doesn't make you passive or detached in a negative way, but it makes you present, intentional, and most importantly, what can be a worry free life if it is aligned with His plan. So the thing is, many of us live in this illusion that control equals safety. I know I'm very guilty of it. It's a very type A discipline. I like a law and order type of lifestyle. I live in a very black and white space. I'm not a huge fan of certain kinds of change. I like knowing what is going to happen. It makes me very happy. Clarity is my bestie. But this is why many of us find ourselves in this situation. We plan, we micromanage, we try to predict outcomes, thinking that if we are in control enough, nothing will go wrong and life will roll out exactly as we planned it to be. And we know that's that's a fairy tale. They say if you want to make God laugh, make plans. But I think the reason that processes and thoughts like this exist is because of a mindset that developed very early on for us. We were praised for responsibility. We were praised for doing things right. We were praised for fixing things before anyone else noticed or before that thing became a problem. And that really was more of like a survival, success based conditioning that most of us grew up in. If we could control the environment, if we could control chaos or we could avoid chaos, then we could avoid disappointment. And that meant that we could avoid problems. And this happened through repetition and reward. Every time that, when you think about in your life, when you've overplanned, you've overworked and overthought, and you saw results, it might have been exhausting and it worked, or so we thought. But we talk about that exhaustion from episode one. Now, on the other hand, every time we tried to trust the process, not do too much, sometimes we got hurt or disappointed. And over time, our brain started to equate surrender with risk and control with protection. And that's when we found ourselves to really just be off kilter. Because if you think about present day, in the long run, if you overcommit, you overanalyze, you overthink every detail, personal goals, relationships, careers, finances, even your own spirituality, you then wind up exhausted. You wind up feeling anxious. You wind up feeling overstimulated, as a social media word of the day. But you still don't trust that your own life can unfold properly without your constant steering and trying to control the wheel. And the way that we have to solve that is thinking about what we truly desire. When I think about what I desire, and probably what many of you do desire, no one really wants to live in a space where you are performing like that on a daily basis, where you're going to the point of exhaustion. So you have to start somewhere with the knowledge. You have to start somewhere with acknowledging this and making changes. And that really all starts with your own self awareness. You have to start paying attention to your impulse to micromanage, your impulse to trust yourself more than his plan. And you have to identify what's the real fear that you have beneath it all. Like, what are you really so afraid of that has you in a chokehold when it comes to letting go? Is it a fear of not being successful? Is it a fear of being broke? Is it a fear of what others will think of you? Is it a fear of not being valued? Like, what is it really? And then you have to make a different decision where you have to choose. And I would say start small, pick a small area to start your process of letting go. Practice saying, I don't have to orchestrate this. I can show up and trust that it will unfold in my favor every single time because the universe typically does tend to work in our favor when we let it. And I'm not confusing the universe with God. I'm just saying the world around us tends to work when we.
This audio was created with async.com.
Universe with God. I'm just saying the world around us tends to work when we relinquish that control. But another issue I think that we struggle with is with surrender because sometimes it can feel like giving up. It can also feel like weakness. It can also sometimes feel very passive because many of us choose to.
This audio was created with async.com.
Feel very passive because many of us choose to resist it because it does feel scary to relinquish control. But present day, we live in a very results driven culture. And one of my nieces once said, we are not supposed to know all this stuff about each other, and yet we do. From the time that we wake up, most of us were on those phones. We on them phones. And until the time we go to bed, we are exposed to so much information from social media to the news to Google, you name it, all sorts of media. And a lot of times when we want to relinquish that control and let go and surrender, it's often framed based on what you're looking at on the outside, laziness or as being a failure. We live in this world of, do more, achieve more, hustle harder, sleep when you're dead culture. And that's been like the anthem of our generation, but it really can't be going forward if you want to see success. But even spiritually, sometimes we interpret surrender as a losing agency. Like instead of trusting the process of God and participating intentionally, we choose to trust ourselves because a bet on me, that's what the world is saying. Now, we do understand that the world is always going to change. Things like social media wasn't always around. And our thoughts, the things are going to change as far as what our thoughts are exposed to. And after years of conditioning, compounded by social media, compounded by comparison, compounded by the pressure to perform, when we see everyone else doing it, hitting goals, growing families, building brands, getting married, growing edges, we start to feel like we are the child that was left behind, all because we chose to surrender. But I always say you don't know what someone's story or journey was to get to where you see them are present day. So it's like you might as well trust the process literally because it's a very fair chance that the one person you are looking at from afar in comparison did just that. The whole time you thinking they was trying to control the outcome and they done let go and let God for real. Now when we think about present day, the other side of it is that, people will say to you sometimes, if you pray, why worry? If you worry, why pray? Because we'll pray down to the ground. But then we try to plan obsessively to control the outcome of the prayer. How crazy is that? But on the other hand, we step back and we say we meditate, but then we try to force the results of what our mind should think after the meditation. We desire peace and we pray for it. But then after the prayer, our minds never stop racing and thinking about the negative outcomes that could be possible. So we have to learn slowly but surely, as I mentioned before, how to separate and have the thought of what surrender is versus the hustle culture of inactivity. What hustle culture makes you think is inactivity when it's not. And what that means is putting forth effort, but not, putting forth effort, but knowing that you cannot control the result. Being intentional and actually letting go and going with the flow. Because if you're not doing that, that is a surefire way to drive yourself crazy because we know that we are not in control of outcomes. But we also know that we can play a positive part in the outcomes of our life if we do what we are called to do, if we have discipline in those things that we're called to do, and if we absolutely just let the chips fall where they may. Now, when we think about the other side of it is the consequence of control. And another thing that I'm truly understanding as I walk this walk of authenticity with myself is that holding on too tightly to control creates tension, it creates stress, and it creates strain in relationships where we can push people away or exhaust ourselves emotionally trying to force certain outcomes, some of which were supposed to never happen anyway. And I feel like a prime and very silly example when you think about talking about social media is like when you see a woman proposing to a man. Things like that happen, not necessarily the proposal thing, but placing a strain on yourself or stress in relationships to get the outcome you want. Um, it's because control is more comfortable. Predictable outcomes are safe. They feel much safer than the unknown. And when we've experienced unpredictability or disappointment, our nervous systems learn that holding tight to an outcome means I'm going to survive this. But we know that to not always be true either. And we also know this to not always be true because of what we have seen in generational patterns before us. Many people grew up in homes where uncertainty was unspeakable. If you had the parents that was doing some stuff and as a kid, you like, are we moving again? You can't say anything. I'm being placed in a new school again. You better not say a word. The fridge kind of more empty this week than it was last week. Don't bring it up. We watched adults handle it all and internalize the idea that control is our duty and our responsibility alone. And what this has done present day is make us frustrated when things don't go according to our plan, not his. You resist guidance, you resist help, you resist therapy, you resist wisdom from the right people, even from God, because your hands are already on the steering wheel. Then you are confused when your relationships, your life, your job, your mental health, everything starts to feel strained when it is your expectation of control that has you causing your own major life problems and how you are choosing to handle situations. And when you truly think about it, the only way to fix this is to pause and take inventory of the life around you and ask yourself, what is my desire for control really protecting? What is it really fixing or making better for me? Then reframe it. And instead of making your goal to control outcomes, make your goal to control your responses and be more intentional with your actions because those are the things long term that you're supposed to be in control of. Those are the reasons that you were given the gifts that you were given so you can control those and let him do his big one and do his part in doing the rest. Now, when we think about the term surrender in practice, when you're actually doing it, it's sometimes misunderstood as being passive. Many people try to surrender and fail because they think that it means inaction. They think that to surrender is to do nothing, to let it all go, to like not think about it, not take any step towards it in an actionable way. Almost like handing it over to someone else completely, as if anything we do in this world can be done without some effort on our part. But it's like praying for a new job or elevation at work and then not applying to any new roles, or telling your management you're interested in advancement and then not putting forth the effort to continue to do well at what you're doing and so that you can reach that goal of advancement. This is really a case of closed mouths not getting fed. And I think this is part of a bigger issue that has come from, again, like a lot of things, our upbringing, culture, personal insecurities that have taught us that
This audio was created with async.com.
culture, personal insecurities that have taught us that
This audio was created with async.com.
Culture, personal insecurities that have taught us that effort must produce visible results or it's not real. That if you're not doing everything, you're failing. And that is absolutely just not true. And I think we got here because after years of trying to earn outcomes, and when you think about outcomes, that could be anything from grades in school, promotions at work, recognition in the world, love and relationships, especially those last two. Instead of trusting the process, literally, that your high contribution, because the effort you put in has to be given it your all. If you're going to show up for the job, don't half do it. But what happens is we don't believe that our efforts plus faith is enough. And we then tend to confuse having faith and the part where you must take your hands off the steering wheel with laziness and having patience with the process as being passive. And we know that not to be true either. So, what I think ultimately has to happen and what this leads to is that in real time, you procrastinating on surrendering to the process because you're afraid of the outcome, or you overcommit in the name of Jesus, which then defeats the point entirely. And the way that we bring resolve to this is that what you should do is surrender in small, practical ways, baby steps, little bites, so you don't overwhelm yourself with the process, especially if surrendering is something that is new to you. And I think this can easily be done and put into practice by pausing to think about the what, the when, and the why before reacting to any failure or disappointment in your life. Because one, that thing might not have been for you in the first place. And then I know that you can pray, you can reflect, you can journal, and then you can act without controlling every detail to figure out what your personal journey must be for you to start trusting yourself and the process more, because it is definitely one effort at a time to see and get the outcomes that we truly desire. And as we walk along on this journey, another issue that you may run to and that I do see happening is that, and I've experienced this personally, will be the struggle of living in the space of tension, like not accepting that life is unfolding perfectly as He has designed it, while feeling like it should also be faster, different, or easier from my end. And this happens because we're humans. And by default, we have these built in timelines in our head. We have these built in expectations in our head. And often these expectations collide with divine timing or the natural process of things. And by trying to direct our life to avoid disappointment, to avoid pain, to avoid failure, instead of learning that those experiences are part of growth and that we have that growing pains exist, we set ourselves back light years when we really could be making great progress towards just leaning forward and going with the flow of life. Because literally, every time we fight it, we reinforce the idea that God's plan isn't good enough. And that's crazy to me. So, present day, when I think about how we want this to manifest, you know, um, or present day when I think about how this shows up. We experience anxiety. We do experience comparison. We experience frustration. We experience misalignment and even restlessness. And even when things are good, we start to feel like something is missing because we are not fully trusting the process of how our life is unfolding. And what that means present day is that we have to be able to practice radical trust. And when I say radical, I mean the kind of trust that makes us stretch ourselves, that makes us step outside of ourselves, and sometimes do something we have never done before to sit in what may be some of the most uncomfortable moments of your life to get the outcomes that only He can render and bring to us, because it is far out of our control. And then we must, I feel like I'm preaching here, and then we must remind ourselves that surrender is a verb, not a feeling. It looks like showing up, contributing, participating, praying, and then letting go. It looks like patience. It looks like faith in unseen circumstances. It looks like a quiet confidence that life is moving forward exactly as it should. Because if you still here, if you still kicking, you still got some life in you, then life is moving forward exactly as it should. So I would say as you move through your life this week, I want you to ask yourself, where am I gripping too tightly? And what is that grip costing me? Surrender doesn't mean giving up, it means showing up in faith while letting go of the illusion that your hands can hold everything. It means trusting the unseen. It means walking in obedience. And it also means choosing presence over panic. So, this is another thing. Here's a takeaway question for you while you have that thought I just gave you. I want you to think about this as well. If I truly trusted God's timing and His plan for my life, what could I release today that I've been carrying for far too long? Surrender doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, intentional steps. It looks like action aligned with faith. It looks like peace, intention. And it always starts with choosing to trust more than you choose to control. So, this is the To Be Single or Not to Be podcast. And this season, we're talking about being authentically free. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for choosing to grow in real time. Until next time, signing off, Shayna Monet.
This audio was created with async.com. This audio was created with async.com.